When you're in a city like Detroit, there's something about seeing Black leaders doing the work that needs to be done, with the well-being of Black people top of mind.
I grew up in Detroit under the era of Coleman A. Young. And if you grew up in that time, and I did not know Jimmy Carter was the president until later, because Mayor Young just took up the city. I now know that growing up in a chocolate city with chocolate leadership really left an indelible impression on my formative years.
Yodit Mesfin Johnson grew up to become one of those chocolate leaders, as she calls them. She's the president and CEO of nonprofit enterprise At Work, or NEW for short. We invited her to join another Black Detroiter who's leading important work in the realm of philanthropy.
You know a person's interest depending on where their money flows, and it has not been flowing to Black organizations. So in my role at night, one of the things that I'm doing is making sure that at least 80% of our philanthropic dollars are going to Black-led organizations.
Nate Wallace is the director of the Knight Foundation in Detroit. And little did we know, they already knew each other. And they've been talking about Black leadership in the Motor City for a while now.
That literally was a conversation born out of a conversation that me and Yodit had. I called Yodit. It was like, tell me if I'm thinking about this right. So first of all, let me also level set. Yodit is, if I feel like I'm going in the wrong way or I need to just check and see if I'm thinking about things right, Yodit is the person that I call.
Welcome to Natural Collisions, brought to you by COAC Detroit. Conversations about the challenges and opportunities in the nonprofit sector, highlighting the voices in nonprofit work in Detroit and Southeast Michigan. I'm your host, Sharnae Sanders. With its roughly 80% Black population, Detroit is and has for many years been one of the Blackest cities in the U.S. It's a place that is rich in culture and talent, hard work, and determination. But like any large urban city, it has social ills that needs addressing. The nonprofit sector is an area many look to do this work. However, many of the leaders in the sector are white. Can the work really be done adequately when it's led by people who don't look like or share the same lived experience as the people they're here to serve? This is a question we posed to Nate and Yodit, and they had a lot to say. But first, it is Black History Month. So I started the conversation by asking them about some of the historical Black leaders who shaped their lives.
Growing up in a chocolate city with chocolate leadership really left an indelible impression on my formative years. I'm also a baby of the 80s, and so, I came home, latchkey kid. The neighborhood caretaker was Mary Hatcher, and I had to check in with her because my mom would be at work. Mary had 8 children. She was from the South. She took no shorts, and if I was a minute late, she was on my head. And I would come into the house, usually around 3 o'clock. I had some chores or some homework to do. And 4 o'clock was Oprah Winfrey. And so when I think about a few people, Coleman Young, Mary Hatcher, and Oprah Winfrey were definitely Black leaders that shaped me.
So similar thread, definitely an 80s baby. And I grew up on 6 Mile in Greenfield, but I summered with my grandmother on Puritan and Turner. So my grandmother was, she was that person on the block. So she led the block club. She was the person that all the kids would go to. She was the one. She actually taught math to a bunch of us on the block. She was that person. She was Miss Mary. She was Miss Mary and she had 1 million kids on that block. So my earliest remembrance of just community work was her organizing cleanups and, doing stuff for the kids and making sure that Thanksgiving came around, that everybody was taken care of and everybody was straight. She was the one going down to the city council meetings and speaking her truth. She took no stuff, and she was that was my grandmother. She passed probably about a year and a half ago, but strong, just super strong, super strong. An amazing example for me, really early on.
In the painting these vivid pictures, I can definitely just see people and also relate to people in my own life growing up. Kind of on the same theme, I would love to know, like, why do you believe Black leadership is necessary and important for Detroit and Southeast Michigan?
This is a black city. I mean, Detroit is a black city. This is a black city. This is the blackest city in the
In
U.S.
America.
In America, right? This is the blackest city in the U.S. And I think that as far as just leadership go around the country, I think Detroit has been called on more than a few times to actually lead the city. Not only with regards to innovation, but also in regards to culture. It's a lot of references that are from Detroit that we never take credit for. I think we're terrible storytellers. I think that Detroit is terrible storytellers. We don't do a good job of telling our stories. But I mean, as far as our importance to the region, it's unmistakable. We have changed elections. We have changed the course of many things that's happened in history. So I think we don't give ourselves enough credit with regards to how we're involved in the arc of history, because we got a really interesting history. We got a really compelling story.
I mean, similarly, right? Certainly representation is important. And we've been talking about that a lot over the last few years, right? But when I think about, and I'm going to kind of tie this back to the first question, I think about Harriet Tubman and Harriet's role, not just in the abolition of slavery, but also in the freedom of, some nearly 100 souls, but also her role in the Army and in the Civil War. She fought in the Civil War. I think about Black leaders, many who, we just celebrated Dr. King, but many unnamed, heroes and movement leaders throughout the Jim Crow South and then into the civil rights movement. We have a free lunch program in public schools because of the Black Panther Party. We have what we now know to be public education because of the Freedmen's Bureau. And so right up until 2020, what we see is that whenever Black folks get free, everybody benefits. So it's about more than representation to me, because the truth is all skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? I mean, I take issue with representation just for the sake of representation. But if we're really thinking about what Black leadership could mean in Detroit and in this region, we have a legacy, centuries of receipts from Black folks who, when we got free, everybody got free. You don't have a women's movement without the abolition of slavery. You don't have a Black Lives Matter movement without the work that Malcolm X did. You don't have an LGBTQ movement without the trans sister in Stonewall, right, who fights at the bar, right, to set off a movement. And so more than representation, evidence. There is evidence that when Black folks are in leadership roles, it transforms not just a city or a region, but the entire country and arguably the world.
Yeah, and it's nothing to say after that. That's a mic drop.
Like some of the folks Yodit just named, she and Nate are no strangers to leadership. And in their particular case, the primary focus of what they do today is leading nonprofit and foundation work in Southeast Michigan. I wanted to know about their journeys and how they got to where they are now.
I'm going to give you the highlights of my journey. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately because I'm working on a teaching memoir. And I really want to lean on the lessons of my grandmother, my mother, my father. I've settled in. I'm 2 years into this CEO role. When I'm finding kind of a settling and the energy around it doesn't feel so frenetic. So my daddy, who his name is Mesfin Ayano, and he is an Ethiopian, specifically from the Tigray region. He and my mother met at Wayne State. My dad had come here in political exile, seeking support for Ethiopia after Haile Selassie had been deposed. And my grandmother and my family have been very connected in Ethiopian politics. And my daddy, I just saw him on a YouTube because unfortunately there's a civil war happening in Ethiopia. And I saw him doing this YouTube video. And when he was asked to introduce himself, he said, for the last 60 years, I've been organizing for the liberation and freedom of Ethiopia. And you know what, Nate? In that moment, that was in the fall of 2021. I didn't grow up with my dad. And I had, as many of us who didn't have our dads in the house do, kind of a story tied to that, right? That I'd been abandoned or what have you. But it's just not true. And I had such a moment of like seeing my father, especially now as I near 30 years of organizing and activism myself, I could see him in his humanity. And I could understand now in a way that I couldn't for many years how a desire for a free and just world, when you get focused on that, it doesn't mean you don't love your family or you don't care about your family. There are many nights when I'm not at home with my son doing motherly things because I'm really trying to make the world, a better place for him and for others like him. So I'm a Montessori baby. And then I was at Victory Christian. And then we moved to the West Side. And then my mom, like many Detroiters in the 80s, chose to move to Washtenaw County as the crack epidemic and endemic poverty hit the city. And it actually had become pretty violent in our neighborhood. And so I talk about Black fight and Black flight, which we talk a lot about white flight in the city, but not as much about, how do single mamas, for example, in my mother's case, protect our babies when community and collective care is challenged. So for high school, I came to Washtenaw County, and it was a complete culture shock, Nate. And I don't think I ever have recovered from it. I'm going to pause there and let you maybe hop in on that stage of your development. And then maybe we could come back and I'll tell you more about kind of my career and stuff. Is that cool?
Yeah, yeah. So, my grandfather owned a auto shop that was literally probably 2 blocks from where my grandmother lived, right? And he had been an entrepreneur his entire life. While other kids were playing and doing kid things, I was at the shop. I was literally at the auto shop, sweeping floors or doing something, But I was with him, and my father eventually took over that business. I was working from the age of probably 4. Um, just just do. I had no Saturdays. It was basketball, it was football, it was baseball, and it was work. Really early on, my grandfather and my father would always say, always sign your own checks. Make sure you're always in a position to sign your own checks. So this entrepreneurial idea was really born in me really early. So just kind of growing up that way and hearing those things, always be in a position where you can create something, make sure that you're creating something, make sure that you're involved in that type of work. Don't always be a consumer. Don't be a consumer. Don't be a consumer. So I literally didn't have a job. I literally worked for myself until recently. I've never worked for anybody up until recently. And a lot of that had to do with just watching the way that my father, my grandfather did it, but also it was a freedom thing as well. I remember I just went to Northwood University, which is in Midland, Michigan, right? I had never been anywhere except for Detroit. So 85% Black at the time, right? So I'm used to just Black people everywhere. That's just normal, right? So you go to Northwood, it had to be maybe 10% Black. So that was a complete culture shock for me. And I wasn't one of those kids that came home all the time. I was there. But I remember vividly, and this was something that really kind of changed my point of view. I had a friend drive me home, and he lived in Bloomfield Hills. And he's driving me home. And we get to, you come up at 75, and we're driving down my street. And I remember like, oh my God, I live in the hood.
The moment you knew.
Yeah, I was able to see it was this double consciousness thing that Du Bois talked about that really kind of manifested. I was like, oh my God, I live in the hood. It was, I mean, that was the craziest thing. That was so pivotal for me because I remember just being, I was embarrassed in a way. I was like, oh my God. Number one, embarrassed for the fact that I didn't know that I lived in the hood. And I was so sheltered and closed off and, just didn't have any world perspective at all. So we're driving in, liquor store, liquor store, liquor store, church, church, liquor store, nail shop, barber shop. And I'm just like, oh wow, this is crazy that I wasn't able to see this. I think that the entrepreneurial piece started to translate itself differently for me then. It was like, okay, I got to take the blinders off. I need to see the world. I need to know what's happening because clearly I don't understand anything. Yeah, it was, that's when I started thinking about ownership.
Yeah, like this idea that you can't be what you can't see in terms of leadership, right? And that entrepreneurial spirit. I've been like, even as I've been working on the book, and when I said I was settling into leadership, I can remember actually when I became COO of the organization and I did this master class with Seth Godin. I wanted to download all the things, right? And it's interesting 5-6 years later to be really drawing upon the wisdom of, our elders, my parents, my grandmothers, not something that came out of the academy, not something that came out of, dominant culture, but really what's our magic is what we've been able to see and sort of be cultivated in, right? Good soil.
That's exactly right. And I think that that experience, number one, it pinpointed and highlighted a moment in time for me when I was like, okay, I really started focusing on consciousness and being aware of where I was, so that's when I started looking at, okay, what type of businesses are actually in our community and who owns those businesses and Black dollar circulation and Black wealth and what does that mean in the Black community and the thought of, this thing where a lot of Black people don't feel as though they deserve certain things in the community, so, the fact that, the concrete is busted up or the park doesn't look good or, all this other stuff. I really just started to pay attention, to that point of view. And my journey was really interesting because I was like, you know what, let me just get out of here. Let me get out of here. When I graduated college, I did not think I was coming back to Detroit at all, because I wanted to see the world. I wanted to really just, just kind of be in a space where I was just kind of going from continent to continent, from different city to different city. And, good luck, Detroit, at the time.
My mom became ill, started showing signs when I was in my senior year of high school. And within a couple of years, she had been diagnosed with early onset of Alzheimer's. So not only that last year, and it really did take a long time to accept the fact that I was really traumatized, my rock, right, is getting sick. But so I didn't go away to college. I stayed around local, primarily not wanting to leave her, but also just a little lost. And I went to community college and then I went over to Eastern for a little bit and I needed to work, right? So I was working interestingly enough, and I didn't know this when I took the job, but I was working for a Fortune 100 company that had a home and building control. It was a midnight job. Nate, interesting, back to representation. I'm at least initially, the youngest, the only Black person, and the only one of two women on the team that I was working on, and very quickly got accelerated into these leadership roles. I mean, I was 23 and the head of vice president of their securities division, right? It was wild, Nate, wild. And so I started to have, I'm a daughter of hip hop. You got just to contextualize this. When I'm in college, Ice Cube's America America's Most Wanted, NWA, right? Like hip hop is really blown up, right? And it's a very defiant time. This is when gangster rap is being defined, right? So there was like a cultural angst happening, and I was feeling that. And honey, I was like, bump Eastern. I'm about to drop out, start a quit this Fortune 100 job, take this 7-to-1 401k match, and start me a record label. And that's what I did. I started a record label, Bad Girls Entertainment. Shout out.
BGE.
So why that's important is really to the point that because at that moment, when I could take the seed of an idea, I want to know what it means to break into this industry, right? I want to know what it means to set my own path. I learned so much about myself, and I learned so much about how systems, not just people, are set up for some folks to win and others not to. So I would spend some time in the industry. I went on to publish a magazine. I even became a makeup artist, like all kinds of stuff, just finding my way. But I think that when we talk about like leadership essentials, I think those experiences that you've described and what I've experienced similarly, I bring those into my leadership. I think of myself like a bridge builder. I can't say that, my lifestyle is different than 7 Mile and Pembroke right now, today, but I haven't forgotten those formative and that soil that I was bloomed in, right? And I bring that consideration into my work. And I eventually would go to work for the Center for Empowerment and Economic Development. And they were the first organization I'd ever heard of that in their missions in this area that said, we support women and at that time, minority entrepreneurs. And I was like, what? Like, that's me. And so I started consulting with them and then eventually took a position. And my job was to lead a online community for women entrepreneurs. And gosh, did I learn so much. And I stayed in that position until the economic downturn at 08 and 08. And it was interesting to me to see, all of the big name companies in this state who have made a commitment to supplier diversity and to, just be like, sorry, the economy, we can't. And I'm like, wait, what? What?
Can't do it. Yeah.
Things are tight. And so supplier diversity wasn't a deep commitment, that innovation that you talked about. It wasn't like a deep commitment to the values and the business case for diversity. It was to check a box. And so I became kind of frustrated. I was working for a nonprofit, but working in the private sector. And I started to say, well, what does it look like to do good and make money? Because clearly in capitalism, right, that's going to be a primary driver, but how do we, and that took me to new and this idea of like social entrepreneurship and how do we support, a strong ecosystem. But all along, the strand all along, and I would say the challenge within my leadership now in the nonprofit sector is that there's such an over-reliance on the sector and very little agency. To your point about neighborhoods and parks and sidewalks, we've extracted community agencies such that, we've waiting on Superman to come and save us. And I can tell you, that white man is not coming.
That's right. That's right. So in college, I'm minored in philosophy, right? So one of the things that was really interesting to me was environmental determinism. And it's this idea that, where you're born has a direct correlation with where you end up. I lived on a block where it's a lot of drug dealers. It was a lot of laborers, and there was no in between. There was literally no in between. I think that going back to the point that I made earlier about coming home and just kind of realizing kind of where I was, it was so much Black brilliance on these blocks and in these neighborhoods. It was so many individuals that had amazing ideas. It was so many people that wanted so much more. And that's just what I just remember, just like, do it. Why don't you do it? Why don't you do it? Why don't you do it? But I think that there's something about the neighborhood in general. It's something about it where it's so many fighters in Detroit, and people have been fighting for so long, That's all they know. All they know is to fight. Some of the guys on my block was that were involved in drug stuff in regards to and gang stuff. Some of the most brilliant people that you'll ever meet. What was interesting was my response to starting to just kind of open my eyes and just kind of see what a different aperture was. Okay, I can't be in this. I don't want to be stuck. So what do I need to do to just move forward? So I'm going to concentrate on money. That's going to be my driver, and that'll afford me the freedom to get away from this. And so I did that, so I started a real estate firm, and that afforded me a lifestyle where I can live in a bunch of different places. I didn't have to come to Detroit except to see my mama and my grandmama and them. In 2012 is when I came back to Detroit. And this is 1 year before the bankruptcy. This is 1 year before the bankruptcy, right? And this is about the time that we met. And I collected a lot of these experiences in these different places. So Brazil and Trinidad and Tobago, London, Chicago, New York, all these different places, especially in like Trinidad and Tobago and Brazil was what really opened my eyes to art.
A lot of people don't know how much you love art.
Yeah, and this is literally where it comes from. Is not only did that expand my idea of what poverty actually meant and what that really looked like, not in this U.S. context, but real poverty, what that really looked like. But you also get to see what hope really looked like too. Exactly, and Black joy specifically, what that looked like. And you've seen that manifested in the murals, in the artwork, in the dance, in the culture, in the food, all of it. So it's just like, ooh, okay. So I take all that with me. I come back to Detroit, and it's depressing. Detroit is depressing. 2013. Downtown is a ghost town. Police response, I think the police had shut down or something like that at this particular time. Like the response time was like an hour and a half or 2 hours or something like that. And don't call after 12 because you're about to get an automated recording. And we'll try to get back to you when we can. I literally got to see the power of art. I watch artists take over vacant buildings, take over vacant property, and literally start to create.
That's right. They're the first to transform cities.
Literally, I got to see it firsthand. These individuals literally breathe life into an area. And after that, I was like, I got to be involved in it. I got to be involved in that because this is something that's interesting.
So you may be wondering, what brought Nate from diving into the art scene in Detroit to philanthropy?
And it was actually Marlo.
He's talking about Marlo Stoudemire, an innovator, community leader, and champion for Detroit, who carried a vibrancy that was seen by all who encountered him. He passed away in 2020.
It was actually Marlo. Me and him were actually talking about. He said, dude, if you really want to make a contribution, if you at this point, I got out of the space where I come to know myself a little bit better to understand that I wasn't money driven. I wanted to be money motivated, but I wasn't. What really drove me was actually change. I like making change. And then at this particular time, you see all this stuff going around. That's when I started to get on boards of art museums and stuff like that because I wanted us represented at these tables. It makes no sense why a lot of these boards are filled with white people in Detroit. That makes absolutely no sense to me. But that's ultimately what led me to the Knight Foundation was me and Marlo having a conversation and saying, dude, if you really want to start making some change, start getting some of these dollars here. He was like, you play that role. I'm going to play. And Marlo was a strategist, right? You play that role. I'm going to play this role. Yo, we got Yodit over here. We got Shmiel over here. We got Kirk Mays over here. You know what I'm saying? So we really just started to create this brain trust. And Marlo was a catalyst in me being at the Knight Foundation.
Back in 2021, the Knight Foundation partnered with Data Driven Detroit, COAC Detroit, and the Michigan Nonprofit Association to commission a first ever Detroit Nonprofit Leadership Survey. Their survey aimed to provide a better understanding of the racial and ethnic composition of staff and boards at nonprofit organizations in Detroit. Nate Wallace was one of several people leading this project, but he definitely didn't do it alone.
That was a conversation we had too, Nate.
That literally was a conversation born out of a conversation that me and Yo D had. I called Yo D and it was like, yo, tell me if I'm thinking about this right. So first of all, let me also level set. Yo D is, if I feel like I'm going in the wrong way or I need to just check and see if I'm thinking about things right, Yo D is the person that I call. I got Yo D, I got Shamil, and I got Kirk Mays, and I got Summer Woods. So this literally came out of conversation. It was like, okay, we're talking about DEI a whole lot, but do we got the data? And I already know what it's going to show, but data is literally the foundation that we need to just start to build on. So, has this been done before, Yo D? What are you thinking about? And she was like, well, yeah, actually, I've been thinking about this as well. I'm like, all right, I'm like, how do we put this together? And that's kind of where the census was born out of.
And it's so important because now, if you look at right at the end of the quarter last year, there was a report that showed the difference between the $300 billion in pledges in 2020, right, from corporate and philanthropy, and the actual 5%, 3% of which went to racial equity and 2% that went to racial justice that actually got on the streets, right? So for me, the leadership census means nothing if it's just a list of who's leading what organizations. It means everything if we can create and track and map where funding is going and how those organizations are being resourced. And importantly, it means nothing if we're not talking about how to get reparations level wealth back into the communities, right? So the leadership census for us started with the fact that in Washtenaw County 4 years ago, we had 2,400 nonprofits and fewer than 1%. So that means fewer than 20 were led by a person of color. We're in the third wealthiest county in the state. And we're the eighth most income segregated county in the country. We got 60,000 Black folks in Washtenaw County and 60% of them living at or below poverty, right? So for me, the leadership census is about saying, are we resourcing community, right? Not white saviors, big white organizations that helicopter in and try to prescribe solutions for these communities, but are we actually resourcing these communities for whom, in the case of philanthropy, much of the coffers and wealth that sits in philanthropy is from extracted community labor, but also from the private sector, which gets off because philanthropy only putting in a small chunk of money. The private sector is absent, right? And they too are engaged in all of the violence of extraction and domination with racialized capitalism, right? So the data helps us call in those who have a role to play in the repair and the return of resources to these communities that have been disinvested. When you talk about the folks we grew up with, they were we say it, they're making $1 out of 15 cents. They're making a way out of no way. And that is America's, it's our worst crime. You talk about stories. It is the most unfinished, incomplete story. And it's the greatest opportunity we have in this country to repair the historic violence of disinvestment and the violence of really turning our backs on whole swaths of communities that don't fit a single narrative. That's the leadership imperative. And this census is just a pathway for us to begin to, I think, to shine a light on where resources should flow.
And DEI has been the word, right, for 2 years, hardcore, since George Floyd. DEI has been, it's been the pass off. People have been using Black Lives Matter like the pass off, like the lamb's blood on the door. You know what I'm saying? Like, please don't touch our business, don't hurt our business, don't say anything about our business. Well, yeah, we're going to give blah, blah, blah to this organization because, we don't want our business to be impacted. It's crazy. Only 3% of all philanthropic dollars touch Black businesses, touch Black organizations. Out of the billions of dollars that's spent in philanthropy, only 3% go to...
Just to contextualize that, it was $470 billion just last year.
$470 billion, which is, and only 3% is going to Black-led organizations. That's absolutely insane. We can't talk about $400 billion and talk about equity at the same time.
Right. But we don't talk about Bruno.
That's right. Exactly. And you can't. The conversation has to be rounded. The conversation has to be centered. And like you said earlier, a person's interests depending on where their money flows. So in my role at night, one of the things that I'm doing is making sure that at least 80% of our philanthropic dollars are going to Black-led organizations. All right. Which is also tough because of the rules and the benchmarks that philanthropy has kind of created for their guard posts. Being able to work with our organizations and our residents to make sure that we understand the process, we know how to do it, is really important. And that's what I consider my work, is making sure that we're in a position to actually get the dollars, and because the skill set and idea is already there. The expertise is already there. I think that I'm trying to do philanthropy a little bit differently than has been done in the past. But my focus is, and always will be, making sure that we are resourced. We have the resources that we need to put up the ideas that we have in motion.
All of you are speaking so much truth, but I just want to kind of bring it to a close, like the last statement on the future of Black leadership. But in a world where leadership and representation in Detroit and Southeast Michigan's nonprofit sector is equitable, what does it look like, feel like? Who's there? What are they doing? If you all could just dig into your senses and really just kind of help visualize, we would love to kind of end on a last statement of what do you both see as the future of Black leadership for our city and our region?
A few things come to my mind. When we gather data like the leadership census that Nate is focused on, and we're able to disaggregate that data, what I'm going to predict is that the majority of those organizations are led by folks who identify as Black women. And I think that when we look at the harsh impacts of mass incarceration, which has left many communities void of our male identifying leadership, that what's happened is that primarily in these communities, Black and brown women are carrying the emotional and physical and intellectual labor of this period of transformation that we're going through. So first and foremost, I want Black women to rest. And the reason why is because we are actively, when you talk about a visualization, I want you to think about us being in labor, and we are midwifing the future that we want our grandchildren's children to inherit. And it's painful, and the back hurts and the hip hurts. But also we know that on the other side of the birth of that vision is one where not just Black and brown folks, because we never got free only for us, where everybody is free and where we have a new and different relationship to these violent, extractive, and dominant systems. And so I envision the future of Black leadership in this region that's balanced, that prioritizes mental and physical, emotional well-being and spiritual well-being, one where we're spending our energy building and not dismantling, one where that's rooted, a movement and a future that's rooted in love, and I mean agape love, and one where, my little boy who's now coming into young adulthood, a world where I don't have to tell him do this or don't do this or drive this way or walk this way, but where he can take his Black boy joy bubble that I've kept him in and bring that into young manhood and into adulthood. That's the future. And I want that for all of our children, but my boy in particular.
I don't even know what to say after. I mean, that's it right there. I agree. I think that our Black women are just doing way too much. They're doing way too much. And having the circle of friends that I have, like a Yodit, like a Summer, and others, it's amazing to see the lift that they showed her. I think as far as Detroit is concerned, I don't think that we understand how powerful we are here. Outside of probably the mayor seat, this is a Black run city with a lot of individuals in seats that have power.
And we need a Black woman in the 13th, by the way. Let's just shout it. Let's just say
what
it.
about resting? I thought y'all wanted to rest. See, that's our problem.
We're rest after we win the 13.
We're resting when we win the 13.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest.
It's gonna be so many people in that race. It's insane. But yeah, we do need a black person. We need a black woman in that seat. I totally agree. But I'll just say high level that I'm optimistic. I'm really optimistic about Detroit's future. I'm optimistic about our leadership. I like the way that people are starting to think about themselves. I like the fact that in very different sectors, we're starting to take the leadership role, and we're not waiting anymore.
Thank you to Nate Wallace of the Knight Foundation in Detroit. You can learn more about his work at knightfoundation.org. And thank you to Yodit Mesfin Johnson of Nonprofit Enterprise at Work. Be sure to check out her work at new.org. And to check out the Nonprofit Leadership Census, visit bit.ly/nonprofit census results. Remember, the word COACT itself means to work together, because we know we cannot have transformational impact if we only work alone. To learn more about COACT Detroit and upcoming initiatives, visit coactdetroit.org. Please subscribe to Natural Collisions on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We will return with more conversations soon. Thank you for listening.